You ever have one of those moments where something small happens, but it changes everything? Not shouting, not drama, just a quiet shift. For me, it started with a glass of water. I had broken my leg. Clean fracture. Doctor said, stay off it. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one hopping around his own house like a tired flamingo. That morning I was sitting in the living room, leg in a cast, crutches leaning against the couch. My son-in-law was 2 steps away, planted in my armchair like he owned it. Football highlights blasting on the TV. Volume loud enough to shake dust from a ceiling. I said, calm as could be, can you grab me a glass of water? He didn't even look at me at first, just kept staring at the screen. Then he turned his head slow, like I'd just asked him for a kidney. Get it yourself, he growled. I'm not your servant. 4 words. That's it. And my daughter. She was sitting at the kitchen table. Phone in her hand. She heard it. I know she did. She didn't say a thing. That silence, that hit harder than his words. I smiled. Yeah, I smiled. Not because it was funny. Not because I liked it. But because in that moment, something became very, very clear. I picked up my crutches. Took my time getting up. My leg screamed, but I didn't show it. Walked into the kitchen. Filled a glass. Stood by the window and drank it slow. Behind me, he went back to watching the game like nothing happened. But something had happened. Oh yeah. Something big. I'm 68 years old. Bought that house with my own hands decades ago. Back when the neighborhood still smelled like dirt and rain instead of fancy coffee shops and overpriced candles. 2-story place. Solid wood floors. Big front porch. About 2,000 square feet of quiet history. I worked 31 years as a senior auditor for the federal government. My job. Find lies in numbers. You'd be surprised how creative people get when they're hiding money. But numbers don't lie. They don't breathe. They don't blink. And I got real good at reading them. Real good. I retired a few years back. Since then, my mornings are simple. Coffee on the porch. Maybe fishing when my knees allow it. I collect vintage watches. Got 14 of them in a glass case in my study. Old mechanical pieces. The kind you wind by hand. Some things deserve patience. My son-in-law. He doesn't understand patience. He understands shortcuts. He runs a small construction company. Talks big. Shakes hands too hard. Laughs too loud at his own jokes. When my daughter first brought him home years ago, I noticed something. He scanned the room before sitting down. Not curious. Calculating. I told myself I was being paranoid. Old man instincts, you know? Turns out, I wasn't. 2 years ago, they moved in temporarily. That word should come with a warning label. Just until things pick up with the business, he said. Dad, you're alone in that big house, my daughter said. I wasn't lonely. But I let them stay. Figured family is family. At first, it was fine. He fixed a gutter. Patched a fence. Played the friendly card. Then little things started changing. Boots left at the front door. Mud everywhere. Thermostat adjusted without asking. TV claimed like a throne. I started watching the evening news in my bedroom. In my own house. Then came the conversations. Big place like this must cost a fortune to maintain. If something happens to you, probate would be messy. Ever think about putting the house in both your names? Just smart planning. Always casual. Always just thinking out loud. I nodded. But I noticed. You don't do my job for 3 decades without noticing patterns. The broken leg happened on a rainy Wednesday. Slipped on the porch step. Bone met concrete. Concrete won. By Friday, I had a cast. By Saturday, I had a clear understanding of the power shift happening inside my own living room. And then came the water comment. That wasn't irritation. That was confidence. He believed I wouldn't do anything. He believed I was old. Injured. Outnumbered. He believed wrong. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying every comment he'd made about the house over the last 2 years. Probate. Joint trust. Protection. Smart move. It wasn't small talk. It was strategy. At 1 a.m., I got up. Leg hurting like hell. Didn't care. Went to my study. Opened my laptop. Pulled out my old leather journal. Started writing down everything I remembered. Dates. Conversations. Little remarks. Then I looked up his company. Public records are a beautiful thing. Took me 4 minutes to find his business filings. That's when things got interesting. Late annual reports. Civil complaints from subcontractors. 3 of them. Money owed. Unpaid work. $41,000 in combined claims. I leaned back in my chair. Now that smelled familiar. Then I checked public contract records. His company had landed decent jobs over the past couple of years. Solid revenue. But the declared profit? Didn't match. Not even close. There was a gap. And gaps tell stories. You know what's funny? He thought I was just an old guy with a broken leg. He didn't realize I'd spent 31 years dissecting numbers for breakfast. By 5 a.m., I had a neat file built. Clean columns. Clear discrepancies. Professional. Precise. Not angry. Just prepared. At dawn, I dialed one number. A former colleague. Still working in the field. Sharp mind. Careful guy. He answered on the 3rd ring. I gave him facts. Only facts. No emotions. No family drama. Just numbers. He listened. There was a pause. Then he said, "Send me what you've got." By lunchtime, things were already moving. Not loudly. Not publicly. Just quietly. In the background. Where real consequences grow. When my son-in-law's phone rang that morning, I watched him from across the kitchen table. His voice started confident. Then it tightened. He stepped outside to finish the call. Came back indifferent. Less relaxed. Less loud. He grabbed his keys and left without finishing his coffee. On a Sunday. Yeah. I knew that look. That's the look of a man realizing the ground under his feet might not be solid. Later that week, I met with an attorney. No drama. No revenge speech. Just paperwork. Transferred my house into a revocable living trust. Kept full control. Locked it tight. No one adds their name without my signature. No loopholes. No pressure tricks. When that was recorded, any plan he had about sliding onto the deed. Dead. Gone. Done. He didn't know yet. But he would. That evening at dinner, he barely spoke. He kept checking his phone. Jaw tight. Shoulders stiff. He wasn't comfortable anymore. Good. Because comfort had made him careless. And careless people leave trails. A few days later, my daughter found the court records. I didn't force them on her. I just showed her. 3 lawsuits. Unpaid contractors. Amounts listed clear as day. She stared at the papers like they were written in another language. He told me those were misunderstandings, she said softly. 3 misunderstandings? Same pattern. Different people? Come on. Her silence that night was different from the silence during the water incident. This silence was thinking. Processing. Waking up. A week later, he tried to talk to me directly. Sat across from me in the living room. "We are family," he said. Funny how that word shows up when leverage disappears. I told him what I used to do for a living. I told him I understood gaps in numbers. Then I told him the house was already secured in a trust. His face. That was something. Like watching someone realize the door they planned to walk through had been bricked up overnight. "This isn't finished," he said. "No," I replied. "It isn't." 3 weeks later, he filed a civil claim. Said he invested personal money into renovating my kitchen and wanted a share of the house. Nice try. Problem was, the receipts were under his company name. Not personal funds. Business expenses. That detail cost him. The judge dismissed the claim. Made him pay my legal fees too. $4,100. Add that to tax penalties and unpaid contractors. That temporary stay in my house became the most expensive mistake of his life. And that's when the anonymous photo showed up. Picture of me meeting my former colleague outside a coffee shop. Left in my mailbox. No note. No threat. Just a reminder that someone was watching. I laughed. You know why? Because strong people don't send anonymous photos. Desperate people do. By the time the tax situation fully landed, his business was sinking. No new contracts. Credit denied. Accountant quit. Installment plan with the government. 36 monthly payments. Every month a reminder. You don't play games with numbers. Especially not when someone who knows numbers is watching. The day he packed his last box, the house felt lighter. No shouting. No big explosion. Just cardboard scraping across hardwood floors. My daughter stood by the window as his truck disappeared down the street. She didn't cry. She just exhaled. "I'm sorry," she said later. I nodded. "Learn from it," I replied. "That's enough." Here's the thing. It wasn't about revenge. It was about dignity. About understanding that silence isn't weakness. About knowing when someone mistakes your patience for powerlessness. He thought a broken leg meant I couldn't stand. He didn't realize I'd already moved the ground under his feet. That glass of water. That was the line. He crossed it. I corrected it. And I did it without yelling. Without threats. Without lifting a finger. Just paperwork. Just patience. Just letting reality do what it always does. Balance the books. You know what's wild? The loudest thing in my house that week wasn't shouting. It was silence. That kind of silence that sits heavy on your chest. The kind that makes the ticking of a wall clock sound like a hammer. The kind that whispers, "Something just changed, and you can't undo it." Yeah. That kind. After he walked out that evening, the door didn't slam. No dramatic bang. Just a soft click. But man, that click echoed. It felt like a chapter closing without asking permission. I stayed seated in my chair for a while. My leg propped up. My coffee gone cold. The TV still playing some nonsense in the background. I wasn't angry. That's the strange part. People think I must have been furious. Ready to explode. Ready to curse someone out. Nope. I was calm. Too calm. And when you're that calm after someone disrespects you, it means something inside you has already decided what to do. He thought he had power. That's what gets me. He thought because I was older, slower, recovering from surgery, that I was weak. Like age equals soft. Like crutches equal helpless. He didn't understand something very simple. Just because a man walks slower doesn't mean he thinks slower. Sometimes it means he's calculating. And I was calculating. Oh, I was doing math in my head the whole time. See, I used to work with numbers. Numbers don't lie. People do. And when you stare at numbers long enough, you start seeing patterns. Gaps. Inconsistencies. You learn how to follow a thread. You learn how to sit still while someone talks big, and quietly check the facts later. That's a skill. A dangerous one, if used right. That night, after everyone went to their rooms, I pulled my laptop closer. Not dramatically. Not with rage. Just calmly. I started with something simple. Public records. Business filings. Property documents. The boring stuff most people ignore. You'd be shocked how much truth is hiding in boring paperwork. It doesn't scream. It just waits. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't trying to ruin anyone. I just wanted clarity. That's what I told myself. Clarity. But deep down, I knew I was looking for cracks. Because anyone who talks too loud about success usually has something taped together behind the curtain. And tape comes off. Eventually. The first thing I noticed, the numbers didn't add up. Revenue claims versus tax filings. Expenses that looked creative. Let's just say I've seen cleaner math from a middle school kid guessing on a test. And I leaned back in my chair and said out loud, "Well, damn." Not angry. Just impressed at the audacity. Here's the thing about people who think they're untouchable. They get lazy. They assume no one's paying attention. They assume the old guy in the corner with the cane isn't sharp anymore. That was his mistake. Underestimating someone quiet is like ignoring a crack in a dam. Looks small. Until it isn't. I didn't move fast. That's important. Fast is emotional. Fast is sloppy. I moved slow. Steady. Like tightening screws on a machine. One by one. Making sure nothing rattled. Days passed. In the house, everything looked normal. We ate dinner. Watched TV. Talked about random things. But there was tension. You could feel it in the air, like humidity before a storm. My daughter barely met my eyes. He acted casual. Too casual. Like someone whistling in the dark, pretending they're not scared. One evening, he tried it again. Same tone. Same edge. Can you grab me a soda while you're up? I wasn't up. I was sitting. He just wanted to see if I'd move. I looked at him. Just looked. Long enough for it to get uncomfortable. Then I said, "You've got legs." That was it. Simple. Neutral. But heavy. He laughed like it was a joke. It wasn't. You ever notice how some people test boundaries like toddlers? They push a little. See if you react. Push a little more. See if you flinch. He was testing. But what he didn't know, the boundary wasn't emotional. It was structural. And structures don't argue. They just stand. Behind the scenes, I kept gathering facts. Nothing illegal. Nothing shady. Just public information. Cross-checking dates. Comparing filings. Connecting dots. And the dots were connecting themselves. Almost too easily. That's when I knew it wasn't just sloppy. It was risky. Very risky. Now let me be clear. I didn't feel joy. I didn't rub my hands together like some cartoon villain. If anything, I felt disappointed. Because when you see someone heading toward a cliff, and they're too arrogant to notice, you don't celebrate. You just step back. So you don't fall with them. My daughter finally approached me one night. She stood in the doorway of my study. Didn't come in. Just stood there. "Are you mad at me?" That's what she asked. I looked at her. Really looked. And for a second, I didn't see a grown woman. I saw a little kid with scraped knees asking if she'd messed up. And my chest tightened. "No," I said. "I'm not mad." That was true. I wasn't mad. I was awake. Big difference. She nodded like she didn't fully believe me. Then she said something that hit harder than any insult. "He says you don't respect him." I almost laughed. Respect. That word gets thrown around like candy. Respect isn't demanded. It's demonstrated. You don't get respect by barking orders at an injured man in his own house. You get it by carrying weight quietly. By showing up. By being solid. He hadn't figured that out yet. Weeks turned into a month. The evidence stacked up. Inconsistencies here. Unreported income there. Small at first glance. But when you zoom out, it painted a picture. And pictures tell stories. Not loud ones. Clear ones. One morning, I woke up early. Earlier than usual. Sun barely up. House still asleep. I made coffee. Sat at the kitchen table. Looked around at the walls I paid for. The floors I refinished myself. The porch I built with my own hands years ago. And I asked myself one question. Do I let this slide? Not because I was scared. But because choices have consequences. For everyone. Even the innocent. Especially the innocent. I thought about my daughter. Her smile when she was little. Her stubborn streak. Her loyalty. She loved hard. Sometimes too hard. That's a beautiful trait. Until it isn't. Until it blinds you. And I realized something. I wasn't protecting myself anymore. I was protecting the future. Because if someone cuts corners in business, they'll cut corners in life. Eventually. And when that collapse comes, it's messy. I didn't want her buried in that mess. So I made a decision. Calmly. No drama. No announcement. Just a quiet decision. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to yell. I was going to let truth do what truth does best. Show up. And when it does, it doesn't need volume. It just needs light. That afternoon, I organized everything neatly. Printed copies. Dates highlighted. Notes in the margins. Clean. Precise. Like I used to do back in the day. Old habits don't die. They just wait. When I closed the folder, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not victory. Not satisfaction. Peace. Because I knew whatever happened next wouldn't be emotional. It would be factual. And facts. Facts don't care about ego. They don't care about who yelled louder. They don't care who tried to dominate a living room. They just sit there, staring, unmoving, unbothered. That night, he strutted through the house like usual, talking big on the phone, laughing loud, calling himself self-made. I watched him from across the room, not angry, just aware. You ever see someone walking across thin ice while bragging about how strong it is? That was him. And I almost felt sorry. Almost. Because here's the thing. When the ice cracks, it doesn't care how confident you were. It just breaks. And water is cold. Very cold. The next morning, I made one phone call. Just one. Professional. Direct. No emotion. I didn't accuse. I didn't exaggerate. I simply asked for guidance. That's it. Guidance. And when the person on the other end started asking questions, I answered. Calmly. Clearly. With documentation. When I hung up, my hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. I just took a deep breath, sipped my coffee, and whispered, well, here we go. Not with fear. With acceptance. Because once you pull a thread, you don't control how much unravels. You just decide whether you're willing to watch. And I was. If you're thinking this story is about revenge, it's not. It's about boundaries. It's about what happens when someone mistakes kindness for weakness. It's about how quiet people can make loud decisions. And it's about this simple truth. Sometimes the strongest move isn't throwing a punch. It's stepping aside. And letting gravity do the rest. And trust me, gravity never misses. You ever send a message and then just sit there? No dramatic music. No thunder. No instant explosion. Just silence. That was me after that phone call. I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel guilty either. I just felt steady. Like I had placed a chess piece on the board and now it was someone else's turn. Days passed. Nothing changed on the surface. He still walked around like he owned the air in every room. Still talked loud on the phone. Still threw around big words like expansion and investors. I'd sit there, nodding slightly, sipping my coffee. Inside, I was watching. Not hunting. Watching. There's a difference. You see, when you've worked around investigations long enough, you understand something most people don't. Consequences don't kick the door down. They knock politely first. Then they check the locks. Then they look at the paperwork. And if the paperwork's messy? Well, that's when things get interesting. About 3 weeks later, the first crack appeared. It was small. So small most people would ignore it. He got quiet one afternoon. Too quiet. Phone in his hand. Scrolling. Refreshing. Scrolling again. You know that look someone gets when they're waiting for a message that isn't coming? Yeah. That one. That evening, he snapped at my daughter over something stupid. Dinner wasn't hot enough. Can you imagine? A grown man stressed over lukewarm rice. But it wasn't about the rice. It was pressure. Pressure finding a crack to escape through. And I knew. The knock had happened. The next week, a letter arrived. Official. Plain envelope. Government seal. Nothing flashy. But heavy. Heavy in meaning. He opened it at the kitchen counter. I watched from the living room. Didn't move. Didn't lean forward. Just observed. His shoulders stiffened. His jaw tightened. And for the first time since he'd been in my house, he didn't look big. He looked uncertain. He tried to play it off. Just routine stuff, he muttered. Routine. Sure. Because routine always makes your hand shake slightly when you fold the paper back up. I didn't comment. Silence can be louder than laughter. That night, I heard him pacing. Back and forth. Back and forth. Floorboards memorizing his steps. Phone calls made in a low voice. Words like audit and documentation floating down the hallway. And I lay there in bed thinking, gravity's working. No rush. No fireworks. Just steady pull. Here's something people don't understand. When truth starts closing in, the guilty don't panic immediately. First, they deny. Then they minimize. Then they scramble. And scrambling is messy. Very messy. A few days later, he approached me. First time in weeks he spoke directly to me without an edge in his voice. Hey, you ever dealt with tax reviews before? I almost smiled. Almost. But I kept my face neutral. A few times, I said calmly. He swallowed. Well, how serious are they? I looked at him, right in the eyes, and said, they're as serious as your records. That's it. No lecture. No threat. Just truth. And man, truth hits different when it's calm. After that, the house shifted. Energy changed. He wasn't strutting anymore. He wasn't giving orders. He wasn't asking me to grab anything. Funny how stress shrinks ego. Real fast. My daughter started noticing too. She'd look between us like she knew something was off but couldn't see it clearly yet. One evening she asked him straight up, "Is everything okay?" He said yes. Too quickly. Too sharp. And she nodded slowly. But doubt had entered the room. And doubt is like smoke. Hard to ignore once you smell it. More letters came. Requests for clarification. Requests for documentation. Deadlines. Deadlines are powerful. They make people reveal who they are. Some get organized. Some get desperate. He got defensive. Started blaming accountants. Blaming miscommunication. Blaming system errors. It's amazing how the system only messes up when someone's cutting corners. Crazy, right? One night, he slammed a drawer so hard it rattled the plates in the cabinet. My daughter flinched. That did it for me. Not the noise. The flinch. That small reflex. That tiny sign of fear. That's when this stopped being about paperwork. It became about protection. Because stress shows character. And his character was cracking. A week later, he asked to talk. Just me and him. We sat at the kitchen table. Same table where he once told me to get my own water. Funny how tables turn. He cleared his throat. You wouldn't know anything about this, would you? Direct. I respected that at least. I didn't blink. About what? He stared. Searching my face. Looking for guilt. Looking for confession. He didn't find any. Because I hadn't lied. I had simply shared facts when asked. That's not sabotage. That's accountability. He leaned back. Frustrated. You think I'm a bad person? That question caught me off guard. Not because it was deep, but because it sounded small. Like a kid asking if he's in trouble. I took a breath. I think choices have weight, I said. And eventually, they get heavy. That's all. He didn't respond. He just sat there. Quiet. For once. The investigation moved forward. Slow. Thorough. Professional. They don't yell. They don't threaten. They ask. They verify. They calculate. And numbers? Numbers don't flinch under pressure. They expose. My daughter finally confronted him after finding stacks of papers hidden in the office. Voices raised. Accusations flying. Words like, "Why didn't you tell me?" echoing through the house. I stayed in my room. Not hiding. Giving space. Because some realizations need privacy. And heartbreak? That needs room to breathe. Later that night, she knocked on my door. Eyes red. Voice shaking. Is it bad? I looked at her. Really looked. And said softly, it depends on how honest he's been. That was the truth. And sometimes truth is the only comfort you can offer. Weeks turned into months. The numbers were reviewed. Adjusted. Recalculated. Penalties added. Interest stacked. Every shortcut had a price tag. And the total? Let's just say confidence is expensive when it's built on lies. Very expensive. He wasn't arrested. No dramatic handcuffs. No flashing lights. Just debt. Structured. Legal. Unavoidable. Monthly payments. 4 years. That's the thing about financial consequences. They don't end in one night. They stretch. They remind. They linger. Eventually, he moved out. Not angrily. Not proudly. Just defeated. Boxes carried quietly. Eyes avoiding mine. The same front door closing again. But this time, it didn't echo. It felt lighter. My daughter stayed. For a while she blamed herself. Then him. then the situation. Healing is messy like that. You go in circles before you go forward. But slowly. She stood taller, spoke firmer, started smiling again. Real smiles. Not the forced kind. One morning she said something that stuck with me. "I didn't see it," she whispered. I nodded. "Love can be loud," I said. "Truth is usually quiet." She understood. You could see it in her eyes. The fog lifting. And me. I went back to my routines. Morning coffee. Short walks. Fixing small things around the house. Simple life. Peaceful. No drama. No shouting. Just calm. Because here's the real lesson in all this. Power doesn't always look like strength. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like paperwork. Sometimes it looks like a man on crutches calmly saying, "You've got legs." And meaning it. If you're waiting for a big explosive ending, sorry. Life doesn't always wrap things in fireworks. Sometimes justice arrives in envelopes. Sometimes ego collapses under spreadsheets. Sometimes the loudest person in the room ends up whispering. And sometimes the quiet one? He never had to raise his voice at all. And that's the thing about gravity. You don't see it working. But you feel it when you fall. Every single time. You know what's funny? After all that tension, all that ego, all that quiet calculating, the ending wasn't loud. It was soft. Soft like a morning with no alarms. Soft like coffee steam rising in a still kitchen. Soft like breathing without weight on your chest. That's how it ended. The payments got arranged. Lawyers did what lawyers do. Accountants cleaned up what they could. And he learned something the hard way. Shortcuts feel fast in the beginning, but they're slow when you're paying for them every month. Real slow. He didn't try to come back. Didn't argue. Didn't blame me again. By then, I think he understood something. This wasn't personal. It was structural. He had built something on shaky ground. And when the ground shifted, it wasn't because someone pushed him. It was because the foundation wasn't solid. And foundations don't care about pride. My daughter stayed in the house for a while. Not because she had nowhere to go. Because she needed space to rebuild. And rebuilding isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's crying in the shower. It's deleting old photos. It's sitting alone at the table and realizing you ignored red flags because you wanted the dream more than the truth. Yeah, that kind of rebuilding. One evening she sat across from me and said, "I thought being strong meant standing by him no matter what." I nodded slowly. "That's loyalty," I said. "Strength is standing by what's right." She looked down at her hands. And for the first time in months, she smiled. Not forced. Not fragile. Real. And that's when I knew she was going to be okay. As for me, my leg healed. Took time. Took patience. But it healed clean. Like a lesson learned properly. I started walking without the cane. Slow at first. Then steady. Then normal. And every step felt symbolic. Not just physical healing. Personal clarity. One morning, I stood on the porch. Sun hitting the old wooden rail just right. Birds doing their thing. Neighborhood quiet. And I thought about that day in the living room. The water. The command. Get it yourself. If I could go back, I wouldn't change a thing. Because that moment wasn't humiliation. It was exposure. It showed me exactly who I was dealing with. And more importantly, it reminded me who I was. Here's what I learned. You don't need to shout to win. You don't need to threaten to protect yourself. You don't need revenge to correct disrespect. Sometimes you just need patience, documentation, boundaries, and the courage to let truth do the heavy lifting. My daughter eventually moved into her own place. Small apartment. Simple. Fresh start. She decorated it herself. Chose light colors. Big windows. Plants everywhere. Life creeping back in. She visits every Sunday. Brings dessert. We sit on the porch. Talk about normal stuff. Work. Friends. Future plans. No tension. No fear. Just calm. One Sunday she looked at me and said, "You were quiet the whole time. Why?" I smiled a little. Because noise is for people who don't have proof. She laughed. And man, that laugh. That free, unburdened laugh. Worth everything. Do I feel proud? Not in the way you think. I don't feel victorious. I feel balanced. There's a difference. I didn't destroy someone. I didn't celebrate their fall. I just refused to stand under a collapsing roof. And I made sure my daughter didn't either. That's it. The house feels different now. Lighter. Warmer. Peace sits here comfortably. It doesn't pace anymore. It doesn't flinch at slammed drawers. It doesn't brace for tension. It just exists. Calm. Solid. Earned. If you're listening to this thinking the lesson is about karma, it's not. It's about boundaries. It's about recognizing when kindness is being mistaken for weakness. It's about understanding that being calm doesn't mean being clueless. And it's about knowing this one simple truth. The quiet person in the room might be the most dangerous one to underestimate. Not because they're violent, but because they're patient. And patience? Patience is power wearing comfortable shoes. So yeah, that's the story. No explosions. No dramatic courtroom scenes. No revenge fantasy. Just gravity doing what gravity does. And a man choosing dignity over ego. Every single time. And these days? When I pour a glass of water, I smile a little. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. Because sometimes the biggest victory in life is getting up on your own. Walking steady. And never needing to prove your strength again. That's peace. And trust me, peace feels better than winning ever could. For more, subscribe our channel.